Hey, a few things before we jump in together. I've got to mention a couple of things about what we have gone through as a nation this last week. Interesting couple of days for sure, especially politically. Highest turnout for voting in the history of America's democracy. Questions about polling, the process of tallying votes. It's been a fascinating event to watch unfold. But in the midst of these tensions and divisions and uncertainty, I'm stirred to believe, I believe this with all of my heart, that there's never been a more opportune time for the church to shine light on a greater, more enduring kingdom than this. As our nation and our states and communities scramble to piece together a path forward, we as the people of God can stand firm in faith. We can be filled with eager expectation about the future. Isn't that good news today? We can boldly display countercultural peace in unpredictable times. And I don't know about you, but that's been my prayer through this process. That yes, Lord, as your people, let's celebrate our civil liberties. Let's eagerly participate in our freedoms. But regardless of how this turns out, let your church turn the world's attention to the true source of unshakable peace. And that is not in a political platform. Hear me today? That is not in a political leader. That is in the person and the work of Jesus Christ. Yeah, we can clap for that. And so just as a pastoral moment for us this morning, here's been my encouragement to my family and to our faith family as we think about our response to this election. And it all revolves the word peace. First one is this. Father, would you help us to be at peace with the people around us? Even if our neighbor voted differently to us, God hasn't called the church only to love those with the same political affiliation as us. God has called us clearly in His Word to love our enemies. Why? Hear this. Because we are not fighting a political battle. We are fighting spiritual warfare for the souls of man. And so let's be at peace with the people around us. How countercultural is that today? Secondly, let's be at peace with the president-elect or whoever is inaugurated on January 20th. You may or may not have voted for the winner. You may or may not agree with their platforms or policies. But hear me today, do not forget who is putting that person in office. That above the vote stands the providence of Almighty God. In fact, here's what Paul calls us to do for our leaders. He calls us to pray for our leaders. Now, please hear me. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everything that they do, right? That doesn't mean that we have to stop standing up for what is right and what is just and what is true. But you and I are called to pray for those in office to have wisdom, to lead us faithfully. And if they are lost, we are called to pray for their souls so that they would have a Saul to Paul moment and maybe even start an evangelical movement in the highest offices of our land. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 2 where Paul urges this. I urge that petitions, church, that prayers and intercessions and thanksgiving be made for who? For kings and all those who are in authority, so that we, the church, may lead tranquil and quiet lives in all godliness and dignity. Friends, believers of the faith, let's be at peace with the president-elect or whoever is inaugurated on January 20th. And then lastly, this one. Can we be at peace with God's purposes right now? That regardless of how you thought this election should turn out, that sounds really silly. Regardless of how you thought this election should have turned out, don't forget that God isn't surprised with the outcome of this election. Hear this. His plans are not in disarray. God's not scrambling for an audible to deal with these developments. In fact, hear this. God's redemptive timeline hasn't shifted a dime since the beginning of creation. Hear this, church. Jesus' return is right on schedule. That's good news, right? And why is that so? Here's the truth. Because regardless of an election, our God reigns. In every season, in every period of history, our God reigns. Our God sits enthroned over every kingdom, over every election, and over every appointment. Our God never fails. And to top it all off, let me tell you something else. That God has promised never to leave or forsake us. As he told his disciples in John 16:33, I have told you these things so that in who you may have peace. In a political system, in Jesus, we may have peace. Friends, you will have suffering in this world, but children of God, be courageous because Jesus has conquered the world. That's wonderful news today. And so here's my 2 cents. Let's turn the world's attention to the true source of unshakable peace. And that is not in a political platform. That is in the person and the work of Jesus.